Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Venison, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to the podcast today. I'd like to welcome Scott Leysath. I've known Scott for several years, and I would describe him as a hunter, angler, husband, father, dog trainer, TV host, journalist, but most of all, a wild game ambassador. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Good to be here, Brad. You know, I haven't seen you since the Minneapolis airport, I think, in person.
Right. You were headed to South Africa, and I think I was headed off into, I don't know where I was going, but I was heading hunting somewhere.
A little less travel this year, though, right?
Much less. I've been home, this is the longest stretch I've been home in 15 years.
I'm surprised that, you know, I will have been married 36 years this October. And I think the reason for our marriage success is that I'm gone half the time. So we've managed to social distance when we needed to here, but we're still alive.
Yeah, I've said it's a good opportunity for society to hit the reset button and find out what's really important. Spend some time with family and a little bit more time around the barbecue in the backyard with people that are most important to you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Question I ask all of our guests. We'll jump right into it here, Scott. How did you get involved in hunting?
You know, my dad was an Alabama farm boy. He grew up hunting. He introduced me to hunting at a young age, but after World War II, he wasn't all that crazy about hunting. So I really started kind of just before I could drive with friends. I grew up in Virginia and hunted with friends. Didn't really know what I was doing. We kind of taught each other how to hunt. I started with a 20 gauge break barrels, HR topper, I think it was. And, you know, in Virginia, once you can get out to the mountains, you can start shooting grouse. And we had turkey early on. We had turkey before the rest of the country had turkey. And went to school in Tucson, Arizona, where I brought an English setter with me and hunted quail on a regular basis. Quail, javelina, some deer, not so many deer in Arizona. Virginia obviously was loaded. And I live in Northern California now, where we have more waterfowl than anything. I normally have to go on the road to shoot deer, but we've got lots of ducks and geese. We've got 100+ day season here, and we can shoot 7 greenheads a day. And so I do find that I'm hunting less now than I was 20 years ago, which is a little disconcerting. So if this pandemic sticks around for the rest of the year and I don't get to travel as much, well, hopefully I'll get to shoot a few more times.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat. I'm looking at taking advantage of the opportunities at home. Of course, I'm spoiled rotten because I live in Alberta, and we have great waterfowl seasons here and lots of different big game, everything from bighorn sheep to antelope. And, of course, we're probably world-renowned for big deer and moose. So there's lots to do here at home. How do you make the connection between wild game and cooking? Now, I know a little bit about your history, but you started off as a chef in a restaurant, did you not?
You know, actually, I have a degree in psychology. When I was finishing school, I was working as a bouncer, and I got the choice of working with juvenile delinquents with very little money with a BA in psychology, or they said, hey, do you want to be a manager of our Phoenix unit? So I got a 2-week training course on how to be a cook, bartender, manager. They sent me to the Phoenix store. These are high volume. A lot of them were just basically saloons, mostly alcohol and some food. I ended up being vice president of the 33-unit chain in some point. I got transferred up to Northern California. That is the other California. And then, so I've been in Northern California since 1979. Yes, I'm an old guy. And so that's not a well-planned career path. When I had when I was working as a corporate guy, I spent a lot of time in the kitchen. Then I had my own restaurant in the Sacramento area, and we would serve wild game on the menu, and people would say, how come mine doesn't taste like yours? So I'd say, well, bring it in. So people started bringing us their fish and game, and obviously they're not going to bring me a duck in plumage. They're going to bring me processed fish and game, get it to me the day or so before. We'll cook it for your group. Some of the local people noticed. I started doing some local news segments. Then I was on HGTV for 3 years, both sides of the camera. I've had my own show since 2001, the original Sporting Chef. Then I had Hunt, Fish, Cook. And now I'm back with Sporting Chef. And again, not a well-planned career path. I was going to listen to people whine all the time, and then I realized I wasn't all that empathetic after all. So working in bars seemed to work out better than psychology.
Right. It's interesting how everything ties together, though. There is a lot of psychology when it comes to eating wild game, just getting over some barriers with certain people. Like you said, you were in the restaurant serving wild game, and people would come in and say, why doesn't mine taste like that? And of course, there's those people that simply say they don't like venison or they don't like wild game and they don't try it at all. So you've sort of tied everything together to create the perfect storm for where you've headed with your shows, because you're a great ambassador for wild game, and you don't just cook on TV. You actually educate people and create recipes and take them that next step in being a hunter, angler, gatherer, and collector. So you might think that it's a broken career, but I can really see a distinct path where it's been advantageous.
I just don't think I could have planned it, is the thing. I feel very fortunate, as I'm sure you do, to get to do what we do for a living. This is when we were kids, reading, outdoor magazines and looking at all these cool things people get to do. And then when you actually get to do it, that's beyond your wildest dreams. Anybody that doesn't appreciate what you and I get to do for a living, other than maybe this year, again, you can't overlook just how cool it is to be able to do this. But I'm very appreciative. And the way I kind of got started is same thing you're talking about. When people say, man, I don't like deer meat, it's really gamey, or they'll make that face like they just passed the paper mill, something along those lines. And I tell them, don't blame the deer. I would do a consumer show and do a sampling. You sit in a booth and you hand people food, and they'll go, all right, what'd you do to this venison? Why doesn't it taste bad? I go, I probably did a lot less than you did. It's the simple things that show people how to cook different parts of an animal differently, that kind of thing, educating them, not wrapping everything in jalapeno bacon and cream cheese so that it doesn't taste like deer, showing them the natural flavor and how to properly prepare something like that. And then I love it when I go back the next year and they say, you know what, I don't give away my ducks anymore. My quail's not dry anymore. And it's just really, really simple stuff. I don't try and out-chef anybody. I really want people to just appreciate the basics.
Right. And I mean, that's what it's all about. Once you figure that out, hunting is your best friend. It generates friends that come over and want to eat all the time, but it really creates a different lifestyle. That's all we eat at our house is wild game and fish and birds. And, my girls are growing up loving it. And I couldn't imagine any, life being any other way. So it's not magic though either, Scott. It's, people just have to get it through their brain that wild game cooks quicker, and don't overcook it. It doesn't, like you said, you don't need to do anything fancy. But once people embrace that, it makes it a lot easier. This show is Harvest Your...
I agree.
Yeah. And I've seen you do that in lots of different places. We'll talk about that. But this show is Harvest Your Own. And, of course, there's a library full of resources from how to get started to fitting a gun, picking a scope, the right ammunition, everything. And I'll give you a little lead as to where to find it.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from? Well,
it's probably easier for you and I to answer, isn't it, Scott? I'm going to dive right back in here with your Instagram post that caught my eye. Sporting chef on Instagram. And while traveling the countryside the past couple of decades, sharing my personal brand of wild game cooking, I've run across many people who just don't like venison. If I had to guess what went wrong, somebody served them an overcooked, gamey piece of improperly prepared meat. Now that's a statement that probably all of us have made over the years, and let's get right into it. What would you recommend for cooking venison? Like, how can you change those naysayers?
Well, the first thing I tell them is to remove anything that's not muscle. If you're going to cook, what kills me is when people say they go to the processor and they'll say, just save me the loins and the tenderloins and then grind everything else or make it into sausage or something like that. That hurts a little bit. That hind quarter, if you take your knife and you remove each muscle, you get rid of all the silver skin, you treat it right. What I do is I'll cut off a little slice of that and I'll put a little salt and pepper on it, put it in some oil, cook it, just flash it a couple seconds each side, taste it. If it's tough, it's going to take a little bit more work. We'll have to work on tender. We'll have to slice thinly across the grain, perhaps a braise or a sous vide. If it tastes just fine, you can do just about anything with it, provided that you don't cook it. I go to about 130 to 135 internal temperature, and I can go less than that, but I prefer not to go more than that. And that would be for the primal cuts, the backstrap, the tenderloin, some of the better hind quarter muscles. I had a guy in West Virginia. We were feeding 400 people or something. A guy came up and I had an elk burger, and serving burger to a mass market is always a tough deal because there are those people that insist on ruining their burgers by overcooking them. So this burger he brought me had just a faint little bit of pink in it. And he goes, "Man, this one's raw." And I said, it's not raw, but I'll be happy to cook you another one. And I said, "Do you cook venison at home?" He goes, "Man, that's all we ever eat." And I asked him, "How do you cook your venison steaks?" And he said, "Well, the first thing we do is we boil them." So picture a boiled venison steak. He said, "First we boil them until they're cooked all the way through. Then we throw it on a grill." He said, "It'll just melt in your mouth." Now, you and I know that that's not going to melt in your mouth. That's going to be a tough piece of venison. Whereas if you just take a well-trimmed venison steak, and you rub it with olive oil, salt, and pepper, throw it on a grill, just mark it on both sides, there's nothing tough or gamey about it. But I think a lot of people, here in the U.S., in Middle America, when people say, "Scott, we'd like you to come out and do your venison thing," and I'll say, "How do you cook your steaks?" When you go to a restaurant, how do you order your steaks? And if they say well done or medium well, I say, "I'm not your guy. I can't come out there unless I turn everything into pot roast. I can't come out there and cook this for you because you're not going to like it."
Yeah, how true. I mean, that's I love your tip about when you're cutting up game, taking a little slice and trying it right off the bat and knowing what you're dealing with the rest of the animal. That's something that I haven't done in the past, but I'm certainly going to look at doing now. You talk about separating the muscles and getting rid of that silver skin. I think with most venison as well, it's very good to remove the bone. I found over the year that if you cut through the bone and include that marrow in a lot of your cooking processes, it does certainly have a different flavor to it. So those are great tips for preparing your meal for the plate. And I couldn't agree more with you about overcooking venison and having it as tender as a boot. The one thing I recall about doing with you, we were down in Wyoming at the High Mountain Jerky, a special grand opening there, and they walked up to you, handed you about 200 burgers and a flipper and said, "There's the grill. Would you mind cooking them?" And you and I were sitting back talking, and some lady walked up and asked for a burger, and you served her one that was probably medium, right around that 130, 135, and she said, "Oh, I can't eat that." And I remember you talking to her, and I believe the words you said were, "Just try it. Close your eyes and just try it. I'll guarantee you it's going to be the tastiest, juiciest burger you've ever tried." And I don't know if you remember that, but she did try it and sort of looked at you with open eyes like, what? What have I been missing?
Yeah, and I tell people, if I say take 15 seconds out of the rest of your life and try this less cooked piece of meat, nothing bad's going to happen.
Right. Now, part of it, I find, and one thing that I recommend that people do, when you start cooking venison and you're not used to dealing with it, and you're used to cooking a beefsteak or pork chops, wild game of all kinds cooks much faster. It's very lean. There's no layers of fat that you have to heat up to cook through that different muscle and protein. So the cooking time is reduced greatly compared to what you'd have with a marbled beefsteak.
And by the same token, you can take your favorite beef recipe and just deal with the cooking time. So if you have a recipe that you traditionally make the beef, if it's a slow cooked pot roast type of thing, you want to use some of the lesser muscles on the venison, some of the more sinewy. But if it's just a steak or a grilled piece of meat type of recipe, your beef recipes work just fine. You just need to reduce the cooking time by about half.
Yeah, that's what I always say too. It's at least a third, if not half. And I know you're very familiar with the Camp Chef products. I use their grills here year round. Even when it was 40 below here last winter, we were smoking and grilling meat on a regular basis. And, when people get into cooking venison, one thing that I recommend they do is use a thermometer, because sometimes you can tell by pushing on the meat and feeling how tender it still is and not tightening up. But the best way to do that is to use a thermometer. And like you said, your personal preference is to take it to 130, 135, which is medium, down to approximately medium rare. But don't let the temperature get beyond that, because it's going to continue cooking even when you take it off the heat source.
Well, and you can always cook it longer. You can always throw it back on the grill, but of course you can't uncook it. So, try your venison at 125 or so, and nothing bad is going to happen. I used to do, in my demos, I'd start by eating a raw piece of venison. And there's nothing gamey about a raw piece of venison. It tastes very, very clean. If you do a venison tartare or a carpaccio and you treat it properly, it's delicious. There's nothing gamey about it. It's when you start getting into the medium well done is when you start to get those flavors. But of course, there are parts of the animal that respond better to low and slow, shanks, shoulders. I'll take a deer shoulder, and I don't break down deer shoulders. I'll take it bone in, rub it with olive oil, salt, and pepper, brown it, and braise it for several hours until you grab that shoulder bone and it just comes out clean and all this beautiful meat falls off. That's what I use for soups and stews and tacos and enchiladas. And it's ready to go meat, and it gets rid of all the fascia, all the junk. It just does wonderful things. You let that moist heat do the work for you, and it gets a much better yield off that shoulder.
Right, and maybe it's good to define what braising is, because I've had people think that that's putting it on direct heat, but braising is actually low, slow cooking with some type of liquid or moisture.
Yeah, it really makes, if you've got a tougher cut, if you've got a hindquarter roast that's on the tough side, if you brown it and then put it into a roasting pan with some celery, carrots, onions, you just need about an inch of liquid in there. And you want to make sure that you keep about an inch of liquid in there. You don't want to drown it. You're just going to, and you're going to set your thermometer or your oven temperature at about, 300 degrees will be just fine. You want to put a tight fitting lid on there. And what that does is the steam heat is what's going to break down that tougher muscle. And if after several hours that bone doesn't come out of that shoulder, make sure there's plenty of liquid in there, cover it up, put it back in the oven, and keep cooking. It's going to happen.
Right. And what people don't understand is those silver skins between the different muscle groups. When you cook them properly, a lot of times they break down into collagen and gelatin, which actually adds to the flavor of the liquid they're cooking in and gives it extra depth of taste and flavor for sure. One thing I want to share with you, I was down in Mexico hunting cow's deer, and the lady in camp wanted some ideas in terms of cooking deer. So that's exactly what I did. I took 4 front shoulders off some cow's deer. We seasoned them up and we put them in a pan and put them in the oven, which happened to be a wood stove oven. And I got back and she said, I was getting nervous that these weren't going to be done because I kept checking them to see if they had surrendered yet. And I thought that was a great way of defining what braising does.
At some point, they will surrender. And if they don't, like I said, just keep cooking.
Right, and that's exactly what she did. She'd open up the pan every once in a while and grab that shoulder blade bone and give it a little wiggle, and if it was still hanging on to anything, she put the lid back on and shoved it back in. And then late in the day, she opened it up and grabbed that bone, and it slid right out without any effort. And I mean, the meat was tremendous. We fed a whole camp that night. The 4 shoulders actually they weren't enough for everyone. They licked the plates clean afterwards.
Well, and that's certainly a lot less work than boning out that shoulder. And again, you're getting the most that you can out of a deer, as opposed to backstraps, tenderloins, grind the rest. It still hurts.
Absolutely.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information. To gain insight and knowledge, head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
Well, that really defines what Harvest Your Own is and why you're on the show, Scott, because I consider you an expert in the field. You talked about cutting up meat and giving it a try and knowing right away if the animal was tender or not. If it's not, how do you tenderize it?
A couple different ways. One of the braising that we talked about will make any piece of meat tender, but it's also done properly. It's going to be more like pot roast. If you've got a tough animal, a lot of times medium rare is not going to cut it unless if you get it, let's say you take a hindquarter muscle that's been trimmed and you get it almost frozen and you slice it paper thin across the grain. That's a great stir fry. You just have to make sure that you get your skillet nice and hot, the oil's hot, and you're just going to flash it in that skillet. Then you can do however Asian ingredients, do a stir fry, put it on some white rice, and it's really, really tender. There are tenderizing little deals there's Jacquard makes one. There's a couple of them that have these flat surgical steel blades that are spring loaded. I'm sure you've seen those, and those cut across connective tissue on a tougher piece of meat. And it actually, you do that, you put a little olive oil and seasoning on it, leave it in the fridge for half a day or so. It's going to make a big difference. You cube the meat up and then you pound it with a mallet, and so that it's of even thickness. That's going to break down those connective tissues and make that more tender. So really, starting with that, let's try a sample piece. That tells me where I'm going to go with it next. I mean, when I go to the grocery store, I don't say I'm going to go get salmon. I'm going to go to the grocery store and see what looks good, and that's what I'm going to prepare whatever looks the freshest, whatever, and then I'm going to decide whatever it is. That's how I'm going to cook it. And the same thing with that piece of deer. We've had back straps that aren't tender, and you're thinking, how is that possible? Well, this animal's been doing a lot of work, and back straps are weird too. One of the things, I don't know if they do that in Canada, but one of the processing problems that I have here is they'll take a backstrap, processors will, and they'll cut it up into little pieces and then butterfly it into medallions. Don't do that to my backstrap. I want the whole backstrap. Right. If I'm dropping it off at a processor instead of doing it myself, I don't know why people do that. But if it's tough, pound it, slice thin across the grain, braise it. You can always do something with it. You can always make a soup or a stew, something that's going to be cooked low and slow. But I normally prefer fast and hot, and so I can take a semi-tough piece of meat, pound it, season it, flash it in a skillet, and it tastes just fine.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Jacquard knives. I've used one of those for years, and it's a great tool for Alberta hunters because I would say the most popular species here to hunt is moose, which is a very long-grained meat. And later in the season. I definitely know there's a difference in moose that are shot early season that are still eating green leaves and stuff with moisture in it versus November when it's cold and everything they eat is extremely dry and they don't have anything to drink. It definitely changes the texture of the meat. But when you have a piece of moose that isn't ideal, a jacquard knife can take it from, medium tenderness to very tender. Like just
and what's cool about it, it doesn't compromise the meat either. It still looks like a piece of meat. It doesn't turn it into hamburger.
That's right. I mean, the other option is to take it to a butcher shop and run it through a tenderizer machine and actually make cutlets, which does change the meat entirely. You're putting multiple round blades through the meat and changing the structure of it to make anything tender, even if it was extremely tough.
Sure.
I'm not sure if you ever used tenderizers, but a lot of people ask me, especially with the late season moose, what do you do with it? But cutlets are a great thing to do. You can cook them on the grill, you can fry them, you can bread them, just brush them with a bit of olive oil and seasoning and cook them. They're very, very versatile and durable, that's for sure.
If you don't happen to have a cuber,
yep.
I mean, you can always take a mallet with the pointy side and hit it pretty good, and then hit it with the flat side, and you can get close to the same result.
Right. Back to your Instagram post for a minute. I thought this was a great tip. In your post, you mentioned making a dark sauce or a gravy for non-believers to hide the pink juices or the pink coloration of the meat. I think that's a fabulous idea.
Well, and where we lose people, right? They'll look at it and they'll go, "Oh my God, I can't have all that blood." I'll say, "It's not blood." They go, "What? It's not blood." And they'll say, "But it just looks like blood." I know. So if you serve somebody that lesser cooked piece of meat and you cover it with a dark sauce, what I find is that people will just swoon over how tender it is. And then I'll show them a piece that doesn't have the sauce on it, and they'll go, "Oh my God, it's not even done." I'll say, "No, really, it is. It's done. It's safe. You're not going to get mad venison disease. Nothing bad's going to happen. I know exactly where this piece of meat came from," and that kind of gives people, the idea that cook it less, and this is what's going to happen. It's not a matter of, for the victory for a lot of people is to make their deer not taste like deer. So they'll soak it in teriyaki for 48 hours, wrap it in jalapeno bacon and cream cheese or whatever. And the victory is, God, it's so good it doesn't even taste like deer or it doesn't taste like duck. And I'm going, yeah, I know, but I don't think that's a victory. But I'm glad you're eating it and not wasting it. But, we have dove season coming up here in California on September 1st. And there won't be any bacon in sight for about 2 weeks because everybody that shoots a dove here is going to wrap it in bacon.
Right. A lot of people do that here, or they use Italian salad dressing to marinate it. And it's if you do that, it's time to step out of the box and try these things. And I love your psychology of the dark gravy. If you have somebody in the family that just won't try it, cover it up and let them taste it and see the results for themselves, because it definitely changes people's minds on venison overall. And that's where I link back to your psychology degree. I mean, using dark gravy is really a psychological move to get people to try it without knowing what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with a little subterfuge. My wife, who does not eat a lot of wild game, okay, we went to South Africa. She said the zebra is the best piece of meat I've ever had, but she had no choice. She had to eat whatever they served us or whatever we happened to cook. I was doing a blog for Winchester, and I was doing a venison bulgogi, which is a Korean marinade, as you know. And so my wife's she's coming home from work, and she said, "What are you doing?" "I'm doing a photo, but I just use beef because it's just a photo. Nobody's going to, nobody knows." And so she said, "Can I eat?" I said, "Sure, just cooked it." She took it outside. I came out, there was one piece left. And I said, "So what'd you think?" She said, "Wow, it's delicious." I said, "Well, that was venison." And she pushed the last piece away. She pushed the plate away and said, you lied to me." And I said, you wouldn't have eaten it if I didn't lie to you. So, it's a lot of it's in your head, but she really, really loved it. And for those of us who have had improperly prepared venison and didn't like it, you got to give it another chance. Don't blame the deer. Somebody done something wrong with their deer.
Absolutely. Scott, you're full of information. Like you're a wealth of information. How can people find out more about Scott Leysath or follow you just to see some of your recipes and stuff that you produce on a weekly basis?
Pretty much, yeah. Go to sportingchef.com is the website home. I do have a blog on Winchester where I cook. Cooking editor for Ducks Unlimited magazine, and we just had a request from Canada for an old recipe that I did for DU. And I have all this standard Instagram. Just go to Sporting Chef, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, wherever people are going these days, or where they are. We have a YouTube channel. If you go to Sporting Chef YouTube, you can watch some full shows and clips from people like you that are on our show. And it's been a real treat, Brad, having you on the show all these years. And we all, as our conversation before we started rolling today, I want more from you. And what I really want to do is get up there when I can, and do a show with you up there for the Sporting Chef show.
Absolutely. We will work on that, and this pandemic will not last forever. History tells us that. So we will share a grill again and a table and hopefully a duck blind or a deer hunt or something and get out and enjoy that. I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a lot of fun, and I like the psychology behind getting people who just don't want to eat or try venison to actually not necessarily lie to them all the time, but cover it up so that they don't know exactly what they're eating and give it a try and find out that they actually love it. So thank you for your time, and we'll look you up on your social media and websites and YouTube. And the YouTube is awesome because you actually get to see how Scott deals with things, how he handles them, how he prepares things. So if this is all new to you, that visual, recipe building is a big help.
Very good, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott. We'll talk to you soon. We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.